Hello everyone and welcome to a very nice game you guys requested I show. It's from the Norwegian League and it's the first game Magnus is playing ever since his great victory in the Tata still this year. So he's playing against Geir, Tallaksen, Ostmoe. I have no idea if that's how it's pronounced, but I'm going to go with that. Well, it's very important for Magnus not to lose any classical points. He announced that he wants to get that 2900 classical elo rating well, you know that he won some 3 points for the Tata still, and if he loses against this gentleman, well, then it's not going to be all that great for his goal, because Ostmoe here is some 400 rating points lower rated than Magnus, so Magnus should be very careful. But he has the white pieces. Let's see what happened here. So Magnus opens with e4, we have c6, the Carlsen defense, and Magnus goes for knight to f3. d4 is by far the most popular, knight to f3, Magnus showing that he's ready to go for something different. We have d5, black strikes in the center right away, and Magnus plays d3, now saying that he's okay with a queen trade already as of move 4. So d captures on e4, we have d captures, and queen captures on d1, so the queens are already off the board, well, most people would not enjoy playing such a position against Magnus. Ostmoe goes for it. King captures on d1, knight to d7. Now we have knight b to d2 and e5, grabbing more space in the center. We have knight to c4, now putting pressure on this e5 pawn, and Ostmoe defends it with f6. We have knight f to d2, and it is now already as of move 8 that we have a completely new game. So knight to c5. You could also consider developing some other pieces, maybe knight h6, knight to f7, knight to d6, but knight to c5, this move allows Magnus to really build up an initiative on the queen side, and he does so. He starts with a4, next he's going to play b4 and make use of this knight on c5. So bishop to e6, now just b4, chasing away the knight, knight back to d7, and now c3. We have knight to h6, black has to also bring the pieces into the game. He wants to play knight to f7, knight to d6 to challenge white's knight on c4, and now we have king to c2. We have to bring the king away from the center of the board and into the game. We have knight to f7, knight to b3, and now knight to d6, attacking the knight here. And okay, Magnus trades. We have knight captures, bishop captures, and now knight to a5, going after the undefended b7 pawn. So Ostmoe castles, king defends the pawn now, and bishop to c4. So another offer of a trade, and Ostmoe accepts with bishop captures, knight captures, and bishop to e7 now. So pieces are getting traded off. Black is very, very happy with himself. We have bishop to e3 now, putting pressure on the a7 pawn. Now b6, we defend the pawn, and now comes rook h to d1. If you try a5, then b5, so nothing to worry about there. So rook h to d1 by Magnus, now king to c7. We do not want to allow knight to d6, so now a5 and b5, just chasing away the knight. And now normal would be to play something like knight b3, knight b2 back, knight to d3, then maybe knight to c5 at some point. But no, Magnus goes knight to b6, and it's a really interesting idea because it doesn't work. Black should just capture this knight, and if the knight is captured, then you get a captures on b6, and after knight captures, yes, okay, you will have to give the piece back. Rook to a7 check, king to b8, now bishop captures on b6, attacks the bishop here, and once the bishop moves, you're going to pick up the b7, the g7 pawn, although not really. Black can capture the rook, and after king captures, you can play bishop to d8. And now the problem is your bishop is hanging, and you cannot capture on d8 because king captures rook. So you're going to have to move the bishop back, and then we just play bishop to c7, and we've defended our pawn, and black is perfectly fine. White is more active, but black should be okay. So knight to b6 is a fine move. However, fine moves are sometimes best just accepted as they are. So here, knight back to b8, and here Magnus goes for rook captures on d8. And this knight to b8 confused Magnus because here, believe it or not, a6 should be winning for white. The problem is, well, look at this. The rook controlling all of these squares, the pawn now controlling b7. The knight can come to a8 with check. It's quite a crazy position. Bishop will be able to capture on a7. And another thing is, if of course the knight is captured, then we just capture on d8, and after rook captures, then we play a7, and that's it. White wins. Whatever you play, knight d7, we're going to bring a queen into the game. captures, and now it's a rook and bishop against a knight and bishop. Of course, this will be winning for white. So Magnus misses this a6 idea. He plays rook captures on d8. We have bishop captures on d8, and now a6. Okay. Still white is better here, no doubt about that. But now black can play knight captures on a6 and eliminated this passed pawn. So knight to c4, this is a move you have to play, because now the knight is hanging and also the a7 pawn will be very weak. You're not going to be able to defend this. So black just captures on c4. We have rook captures on a6, king to d7, and rook captures on a7. We have bishop to c7 blocking, so if bishop b6 attacking the bishop, you can play rook to c8, so it's not a problem. Magnus starts with f4. G4 would have been a little bit better, but okay, he knows his plan. We have f4, king to c8 by black, and now f captures on e5. We have f captures on e5, and it seems Magnus again created a winning position. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find this incredibly sneaky winning move for white while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting such a brilliant tactic. You are a truly masterful tactician. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is bishop to b6. That's the good stuff. Point is, well, now that you see it, of course you believe it, but if we play rook to a8 check, we cannot win the rook because the bishop blocks with bishop to b8, but by playing bishop to b6, we are threatening to pick up the bishop, and what can the bishop do? If you just capture the bishop, then rook a8 check, we pick up the rook here, and we win the game. And if you don't do that, if you play something like bishop to d6 to always be able to block rook a8 with a bishop to b8, then rook captures on g7, you've lost a very important pawn, and now the position will be winning for white. So this was in the position. However, Magnus misses this as well. He plays rook to a8 check, bishop to b8, and now goes rook to a5. We have king to b7 and now b5. So hoping to get some trades in, then he's going to eliminate both of these pawns. So rook to c8 instead. Black takes this opportunity to bring the rook into the game. Now b6. And okay, Magnus again creates a passed pawn. We have rook to f8, and now comes rook to a1. We have rook to f6. Now black wants to somehow maybe get the bishop here, play c5, move the bishop, and then pick up the pawn, something like this. So here we have g3. And now h5. Black wants to create some weaknesses here to try and get rid of those kingside pawns. King to d2. We have rook to d6 check, king to c2, rook to f6. Bishop to c5 now, not allowing rook to d6, and now h4, creating weaknesses on the king side. Magnus plays rook to d1, and now h captures on g3. We have h captures on g3 and the rook g6, going after the g3 pawn. So rook to d7 check, king to a6, and now rook to d8, going after the bishop. You don't really gain anything with rook to a7 check because the king can go back. I know some of you are looking at this, but king b7 prevents the stops the pawn. So instead, after king a6, we have rook to d8, going after the bishop. Now comes king back to b7, bishop to f2, guarding our g3 pawn, and rook to f6, going after the bishop. Bishop to e1, and now g6. We have bishop to d2. We are shifting the bishop over to e3 to control this square and also guard the pawn. And of course, the king cannot capture the pawn. The bishop would be hanging. So bishop to d6. Now comes bishop to e3, not allowing bishop to c5. And now black finally plays c5, and the pawn will now fall. And look at this, g4. King captures on b6, and now it's Ostmoe who is actually up a pawn. Okay, c4 pawn is very weak, so Magnus will be able to win this one. But from twice a winning position to this, not looking great for Carlsen's road to 2900. So here, rook to e8, we have king to c6, and now g5. Attacking the rook, we have king d7, offering a rook trade, and now Magnus goes back, rook to a8. We have rook to f3, attacking the bishop, king d2, now king to e6. We have rook to a6, pinning the bishop, so bishop captures on c5 is an idea. King e7, we just sidestep this threat. Rook to a7 check, king to f8, now rook to a4. We will win this pawn, but still it's gonna be equal material. Bishop e7, rook captures on c4, rook to g3, and now bishop captures on c5. There is nothing better. You could just keep guarding this pawn, but then neither side can do any progress. So bishop captures on c5, rook captures on g5, and now bishop to b4. We have rook to g2 check, king d3, rook to g3 check, king to c2, and now bishop captures on b4, c captures, and king to e7. So now again Magnus has a passed pawn, but will it be enough? Black also has a passed pawn. So b5, we have rook to f3, making room for the passed g pawn. Rook to c5, now comes king d6. We have rook to d5 check, king to e6, now rook to d8. We have to prevent the rook from getting behind the passed pawn, and also we want to stop it from getting to that passed pawn in any way. So king e7, we have rook to g8 going after this pawn, and now king to d6. Black playing it very, very correctly. Rook captures on g6 check, king to c5, and now b6. So we still protect our pawn. Now Magnus is up a pawn. Rook to f7, preventing the pawn from reaching b7. Now rook e6, attacking the e5 pawn. We have king d4, the pawn is defended. King b3, we have rook to f1, king to a4, and now king captures on e4. So again, equal material, rook to d6, and now rook to b1. We have our rook behind the passed pawn, and as you know, that's always great. King a5, we have king to f3, rook to f6 check, king to g3. We have rook to f5, waiting for a push so we can block the rook with rook to b5. So here e4, rook to b5, now offering a rook trade, and rook a1 check. We have king to b4, and of course rook to a8. We will be stopping the pawn. So king c3, we have e3, black also pushes his passed pawn, and king to d3 now. We have king to f4, defending the pawn. Now comes b7, attacking the rook, rook to d8, check, king to e2, and now rook to b8, stopping the pawn from promoting, rook to b4 check, king to e5, and now Magnus even wins the e3 pawn, but king to d5. The king is now much too close to the passed pawn. King to d3, we have king to c6, and that's just it. There's no way to stop rook captures on b7. So king c4, rook captures on b7, rook captures, king captures, and it is now on move 84 that we have a draw by insufficient material. So big congratulations to Ostmoe for achieving this well, great victory over the world champion. Even if it's a draw, it's a great victory, I imagine, for him. With the black pieces, he is some 400 rating points lower rated than Magnus. And what does this mean for Magnus's road to 2900? Well, he won some 3 points in the Tata Steel tournament for the entire event, and for just this one game, Magnus lost 4 points. So it's not going to be easy. So yeah. That's the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Very, very nicely played by Ostmoe. Magnus had that chance, but he missed it, and that was enough to claim a draw. I would like to wish a very happy birthday to Nikki, and I would like to thank David Kimura, Triple Triangle, Daniel Silverberg, and John Black for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Grand Prix, and of course checking up on your wonderful suggestions such as this one. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Sunday.